online school, about to get into a composition presentation for you. But before we do that, just to let you know how and what's going to happen from here on out with online school is I'm going to be sending out presentations like what we would have done in school. You're going to go through them, watch all the lovely little slides that I have for you and fantastic information, and then you're going to go out and start shooting finally. So we'll start out here with composition here on slide 1. So basically just going to go how to set up with what you're going to want to shoot, which you did as well listening to and watching the Ben Long videos. And for the lonely week we had in school, listen to some things I had to say. So we'll jump right in. So the rule of thirds is applied by aligning the subject with guidelines and intersection points. So you've seen that. We've talked about that. You're going to place the horizon on the top or bottom line of the rule of thirds, and then allow linear features or objects in the image to flow from section to section along those lines. So for instance, on the photos we have here of the little bee, now the one on the left is placed directly in the middle. That is what we do not want to do 95% of the time. Here you have a lot of dead space on the outside, which could be filled by zooming in. And we usually want to have something offset. So over here on the right, you have the bee. We zoomed in a little bit. It's a little bit bigger. It is offset. It is not perfectly through the rule of thirds lines, but it's getting better. So if you would have an imaginary line going up and down on the left side, and then on the top, that is where the bee's body and head is going along that line and just about at that intersection. So it's going to be more appealing to look at instead of placing something directly in the middle. And then here they don't have the grid on there. So hopefully after you've taken a bunch of these, you can start to just imagine the grid there. Let's go back to that first photo that was on the opening slide and go over how everything's working with the rule of thirds. So you do have the lines on here on this photo. So 2 lines going vertical, 2 lines going horizontal, again, to break it into thirds. On the top third, you have the clouds going through the top third. The middle third is basically just the sky. The bottom third, you have the water and the little rock formation. Now, again, not everything is perfect. So like the horizon line from where the water and the sky meet is not directly along the line, but it's close enough. You have the woman who's standing on the rocks. She is going directly right through one of these lines for the rule of thirds. And then at this top right intersection, you have a person's focal point, which is usually their head or their eyes, just directly in the intersection. And what Ben Long taught you, the direction that you're looking is where you want the majority of the open space to be. So we're looking at this picture. She's looking to our left, and that's where the majority of the open space is, where behind here is less. So a whole bunch of different things on this photo that follow the rule of thirds. Again, here's what it looks like with those lines. And again, wanting things to cross in intersections, whether those are the main objects or what you would like your eye to direct yourself through. Now, if you're going to be shooting with your phone, which the majority of you are going to be doing, I don't have an iPhone. I'm going to assume you have an iPhone. You can set your phone to view these lines, but then obviously when you take a picture, you will not see the lines. It's in the settings somewhere, so you can set that and turn that on from here on out if you would like to do that. Now we'll get into some more examples. Here's a lovely little deer hanging out on a field. So photo on the left doesn't have any lines. Photo on the right obviously does have lines. So top third is being taken up by some of the clouds in the sky. Middle third is being taken up by just blue sky. Bottom third is being taken up by the field. Now this one is like almost perfect where that horizon line is separating the field from the sky. Deer not in the middle, offset on the bottom right. And then the deer is looking to the left, and that is where the open space is. On the right side, not as much open space. So when you look at it without the lines, hopefully you realize that this is a pretty appealing looking photo, especially when the deer is not directly in the middle. This photo is pretty similar. Same stuff kind of going on. Top third is being taken up by the clouds in the sky. Bottom 2/3 are being taken up by the sand or the dunes. You don't always have to separate it third by third by third. So sky takes up a third, bottom 2/3 together are taken up by the sand and dunes. And then same deal with the deer. You have the rickshaw being pulled here where the open space is to the left. That is where the majority of the space is. And again, they are right at an intersection of the rule of thirds, making this a pretty appealing photo. Now over here, there's a couple things that I'd be talking about in class. I'm going to say a lot of words throughout these. I'm going to use the word landscape and portrait a lot. Now, when I say landscape, most of the time it means shooting a landscape photo, going outside, or shooting architecture. Or when I say shooting a portrait photo, it's going to be pictures of people or animals. Just to let you know on here that there's also modes. So landscape mode is going to be a photo that is wider than it is tall. I always remember that because you go outside to shoot an actual landscape shot, you want to see the vast majority of that landscape. And then portrait on here, it is taller than it is wide because you think of people being taller than they are wide, or think of your yearbook portraits. Those are taller than they are wide. So I will be saying those words a lot. So just to let you know what I'm talking about, if I'm either talking about landscapes or landscape mode. Back to the lovely little picture of the cat here. This is just to show you again a photo being taken directly in the center compared to a photo being offset using rule of thirds. Hopefully you can tell that the picture on the right is going to be more visually appealing than the one on the left. And then with the rule of thirds, the chair is taking up the bottom, the back of the seat is taking up the middle third, and then you just have the red space on the top taking up a third. The cat's head, which is the focal point, head or eyes, right at an intersection, and then the head down through the chest and the legs of the cat, going right down that line. And then kind of funny, the back and then the back legs just kind of curves across, just touching that other intersection. So again, using those little points in the rule of third and lines, this photo should be far more appealing to look at than this photo here. All right, last one on rule of thirds. And then just to talk about this, you're going to strive to use the rule of thirds to make these photos to look the best you can. But remember, it does not have to be exact. And a lot of times the pictures aren't going to be exact. So you at least want to offset your image. Don't put the main focal point directly in the middle of the shot. Please don't do that. And then you can just always offset here. So again, the dog is not necessarily in the intersection of the rule of thirds, even though it's the focal point. It is offset though into one of the corners. So this is like the foreground. You have the dog and the little piece of rock right there. Again, not perfectly along the line or intersection, but it works. You have the middle ground, or in the middle here, you have kind of the brighter green parts of the landscape that are back there, taking up almost the middle. And then the top third, which is the far background, is definitely taking up the top third, and then it bleeds into a little bit of the middle. So while this is not exact using rule of thirds, it's still offsetting main imagery. You still have a foreground, background, middle ground, kind of in the rule of thirds. The dog is looking to the left where the open space is. So it's not perfect, but it's still a well-composed photo. All right, semi-done with rule of thirds. Now we're going to go to rule of odds, which have to do with getting a well-composed photo as well. You can probably guess what this is. Rule of odds states that framing your subject with two surrounding objects or more, thus create an odd number. And again, in this case, the odd number is 3. This usually suggests balance and harmony. So here are some snails going across some deck boards or whatever it is. There are 3 of them. You can try to imagine blocking one of them out. And then again, visually, it's just not going to look as well as it does right now. So you do have the rule of odds with the 3 snails. And then other composition aspects. It is using rule of thirds. So they are actually going right along where one of those lines would be on the top. You think about aperture with Ben Long and Steven. You have your focal point in focus, and then the background and the foreground here is kind of blurry, so you even more so focus on the snails. And then this one's fun. It's just black and white. Usually when you make black and white photos, it makes them a little more dramatic, and in this case, I think it's a little more fun to look at. All right. With this, just looking at 2 images, it seems a little bit boring because a lot of times you don't know which one to focus on. You're kind of moving left and right, not knowing where to go. Where if you do have an odd number, at least one of those you can be your focal point or have it be interesting. By this little clip art is explaining. The middle star might be interesting just because it has some accent pieces on either side to kind of back it up. All right, now checking out some photos and just going over why these photos are or are not successful with composition. So let's start with the rule of odds on this photo here. There are not necessarily 3 different things on here, being an odd number, but you can look at some objects. Again, not necessarily people or things, but some objects. So I look at this balloon here, it is pink. So because of the color, it is kind of sticking out. You look at the girl here, her face, which is usually a focal point, that is sticking out. And then even her arm that is going up. Usually you don't walk around with your arm sticking up in the air. And because she is wearing white with a darker green background, that's sticking out. So you do have kind of her arm, her face, and balloon using the rule of thirds to balance out this photo. Another fun one is negative space. Because of the way that her arm is going, you have this little triangle of negative space that you see through. And looking around in between the head, the stick that's holding the balloon, and on the other side, you have a little bit of negative space in between there too. And then back to the rule of thirds. The arm is going up. This is about where a line would be for the rule of thirds. This isn't perfect, but her eyes are almost set on where a line going across where the rule of thirds would be there. And then her hand, which is kind of sticking out, holding up the stick of the balloons. This is at an intersection of the rule of thirds. So again, not everything is perfect, but it still just about meets all of our parameters for composition. And this is a well-composed photo. Now this photo here with the lovely little Lego characters. I would say just first and foremost, if anything, you just want your photo to be interesting. You don't have to follow every single rule and have everything be perfect, but if something is interesting, people are going to look at it and appreciate it. There's a study I read last year that said people go to museums, only stand and look at a piece of art for 5 seconds. So if you can get somebody to look at your photo for more than 5 seconds, I think you're doing a good job. And you can probably think of yourself as you're sitting there scrolling through Instagram. How often do you take more than 5 seconds to look at a photo? And I bet if you do, you probably find it far more interesting than all the other celebrity selfies that you see there. So at least try to make it interesting so people will look at it for more than 5 seconds. Back to our rules. You do have rule of odds. We have 5 Lego characters here hanging out. It's pretty symmetrical. So back to the rule of thirds. I'd say the top third, just right above their heads, is kind of taken up by this blank space. Bottom third, the table that they're on, is taken up kind of the blank space. And then they're just kind of hanging out in the middle. Again, their eyes are all going through about one of the lines for the rule of thirds. Now, there are things you could do better here. It would be nice to see this photo to be a little more symmetrical. So on the outside of old Harry Potter's hand right here, there's a tiny bit of space. Over on the right side with the baseball player, there's far more space. It would be nice to see this cropped and nice and symmetrical so the tennis player is directly hanging out in the middle, because she does have 2 Lego pieces to balance her out on either side. Last photo. Again, I mentioned just making this interesting. This is one of what I think are the more interesting photos, because the more you look at it, the more interesting things that you are going to see. So if this breaks through the 5 seconds, I keep staring at it because I think it's a really cool photo. Through our rules though, you have the rule of odds. You have 7 people who are standing here. Rule of thirds, the top third is being taken up by blue-ish sky. Middle third is being taken up of kind of the orangish red sky, because this is golden hour. And then you can't really see the bottom of it, but the bottom of the photo does go to about here just because it's black and a black background. But that bottom third is taken up by whatever they are standing on. What also is making this interesting is this photo is a silhouette. So what Ben was talking about when he was shooting Steven in those videos, the sun is in the background and it is behind your subject, meaning the other side of them is probably lit up and you can see detail, but because we're on this side, they are in silhouette and we cannot see any detail. So it's cool that they're using the golden hour. You'll start doing that if you're walking around outside once the sun is setting. And then really the most important thing, again, have it being interesting. I look at this and I wonder what's going on. It makes me want to know more. Second guy here's got a cowboy hat on. So I'm thinking, is this a Western? No, because this guy is wearing a normal hat. So I want to know what's going on with these people. What are they holding? Kind of looks like a backpack. I don't know if this is a backpack on them or what this guy is holding. So what is happening and what are they standing on? I assume they're standing on some type of rock formation. But again, do you see rocks that have perfect 90-degree angles? Usually not. So I'm wondering what they're standing on. Then in the far background, you do see what I think is a house or a cabin or something going on. And these tiny little pieces right here are actually vehicles. So Make sure you are using the rules that you were supposed to use with composition, whether it be a rule of thirds, rule of odds, using negative space, thinking about where your light source is. All of that together is going to make some interesting photos. And then again, just make sure your subject matter is interesting, like the last 3 photos we've had. From here, I'm going to send directions out, and you're going to go on Google Classroom, and you're going to have directions on how to take your first real assignment going out, which again is going to be composition photos. Thanks for watching all the way through. See ya.